Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Be Like Christ for another Bible study, another 5-minute study through a chapter of the Bible. Today, Exodus chapter 17. As always, you can get the handout that you're seeing up on the screen for free as a PDF download on our website. There's a link down in the description to tobelikechrist.com. When did the events of Exodus chapter 17 take place? Well, the Israelites received their freedom from Egypt in about 1491 BC. The events of Exodus chapter 16, the last chapter, occurred about a month after the Exodus, and the events in chapter 17 appear to have followed shortly thereafter. Now, as we think about our main characters for chapter 17, we've got the Israelites, also known as the Hebrews. They were the descendants of Jacob's 12 sons who had grown into a large nation. For a couple hundred years, they were enslaved in Egypt, but now they've received their freedom. That was in large part due to, truthfully, it was due to God, but it was God's work through Moses and through Aaron, who he sent as his representative to facilitate some incentives. Moses and Aaron were the ones who went before Pharaoh. They commanded him to let the people go, and when Pharaoh refused to let the people go, the 10 plagues were brought on Egypt. So Moses and Aaron, they were brothers, and they were God's representatives in that process. Our final character is somebody new. It's actually a nation of people, the Amalekites. This was a nation of people that made war with the Hebrews after they left Egypt when they were camping in a place called Rephidim. All right, now for our map, where did these events take place? God led the Hebrews through the Red Sea, as we talked about in, I think that was chapter 14, and he then took them to a place called Marah and a place called Elam. In Exodus chapter 16, the Israelites went to Elam in the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elam and Sinai, and you can see the wilderness of Sin on the map down below. In chapter 17, they left the wilderness of Sin and they camped in a place called Rephidim. Chapter 17 is somewhat of a short chapter. We've only got 16 verses to cover, and they split pretty evenly. Our first section, verses 1 through 7, is God bringing water from a rock. So after gradually traveling out of the wilderness of Sin, the Israelites camped at Rephidim, and they immediately began to do what? Oh, their favorite thing, to complain because they didn't have any water. They grumbled against Moses and against God, and they began questioning whether God was with them in the first place or not. God told Moses to take the elders of the people and the staff that he had used when he had worked miracles before Pharaoh, and to stand on the rock of Horeb, as it was called. Moses was told to strike the rock with his staff and water would come out. And so that's what he did, and water flowed from the rock and all the people were able to drink. Moses called the place Massa and Meribah because of the quarreling of the people and because, quote, they tested the Lord. So then in our second section, verses 8 through 16, we're going to talk about the war with Amalek. The Amalekites came to Rephidim and they fought against the Israelites. We're not exactly told why in this chapter, but we're told that they did this. Moses commissioned a man named Joshua, who's going to be very important in the upcoming books and in the future of the Israelite nation. Joshua was supposed to lead a select group of warriors to fight against Amalek. Moses told Joshua that he would stand on the hill above the battle with the staff of God in his hand. So Joshua went to the battle, and Moses, Aaron, and a guy named Hur, H-U-R, climbed to the top of the hill. Whenever Moses held up his hands, the Israelites would prevail. But whenever he put his hands down, Amalek would start winning. Interesting. When Moses got tired of holding his arms up, because that happens eventually, Aaron and Hur held his arms up for him, and eventually Joshua defeated the Amalekites, and Moses built an altar to the Lord called, quote, "The Lord is my banner." And so now for our application in Exodus 17. You may have the question, as I did, why did Moses have to hold up his hands and hold up the staff of God in order to have victory in this battle? Well, I think it's probably because the staff represented God's power. You think about the way that the staff had been used previously. There were miracles that were done before Pharaoh with the staff. When God brought about the plagues, it was Aaron or Moses who held out the staff to cause those plagues to begin. When Moses was at the Red Sea, he held out his staff, and it represented God's power, right? It was clear that God was doing these things when the staff was present and it was being used. It was to be understood, I think, in this battle that the battle and its victory belonged to God. The Israelites had been freed by the power of God. They had been nourished by the power of God when he gave them food in the last couple chapters, and they had been protected from their enemies by the power of God. And this is going to be a pattern that we see repeated again and again, where God's going to teach the Israelites and other people in the Old Testament and also in the New Testament that if they're going to succeed, it's going to be by God's power. It's not going to be by their own. This is, I think, why Jesus taught, quote, "Give us this daily bread," or he instructed his apostles to pray, "Give us this day our daily bread and deliver us from our enemies." God did that for the Israelites when they were in the wilderness. God continues to do that for us today. And those prayers and the instruction to pray like that is to constantly remind us that God's the one who takes care of us, and that he's the one who provides our needs. And without him, we're not going to be successful.